My name is Loren Wold. I'm in both the colleges of nursing and medicine. I have a cross appointment. Actually was in the College of Medicine fully when I was at Children's from '06 to '13, and then moved to main campus and now have the dual role. So I am editor-in-chief of Life Sciences, which is an Elsevier publication. It's actually the oldest pharmacology journal in the Elsevier portfolio. I've been editor-in-chief for 6 years. Started out when I took over, a funny story about, if you're interested, how to get involved in journal editing, because I started out, I was a postdoc, and my boss was an associate editor, but I did all the work for her. And so when I got my first faculty position, she told the editor at the time, I've actually not really been doing this. My postdoc's been doing it, and he was happy with the work she had supposedly done. And so, yeah, so he put me as an associate editor, and 4 years later, I became the editor-in-chief. So at the time, there were 42 associate editors, 2 executive editors, and an editor-in-chief. Right now, I have 8 associate editors and myself as editor-in-chief. I took over, there were 700 submissions a year. Last year we got 3,500. Our impact factor has gone from 1.7 to 3.5. So we're growing. As I said, 54 years old now, the journal is. And I'll talk to you about some of the things that I've seen and how peer review and submissions and such is changing, and how to get your stuff noticed. Because I think that that's a question that a lot of you probably have in mind. So, pass it along to my friend Don. He's got his own.
Yeah, I'm an associate editor for Optometry and Vision Science. It's an organization's journal. It's the official publication for the American Academy of Optometry. We're peer-reviewed and not open access. Only selected articles are available. We want to have this as a member benefit for our Academy members, so it's subscription for the first year after an article is published, and then it's open access after that first year. We're probably about 90 years old, and eye and vision, and then optometry as a piece of eye and vision is actually fairly small. Our submissions have increased as well over 10 years, from something like 200 a year to 600 or 800 a year, and very small as far as infrastructure goes. There's an editor-in-chief, 2 associate editors, and 1 managing editor. And what I hope to take away from this panel is how everybody else does it, because it's quite a burden on time, how everybody else's infrastructure runs. It's quite a burden on time to be an associate editor, even at that small of a volume. How do you become an editor of a journal? Be a really, really great reviewer, and you will become noticed, and people love a volunteer who can get stuff done, and your star will rise.
Yes, I'm Steve Rosenstiel. I'm a retired prof in the College of Dentistry, so I have lots of time to be journal editor. But that's a great retirement job. But I would still practice a day a week, so if you've got a broken tooth, I'm your guy to take care of it. So our journal is the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry. It was established in 1951. It's published by Elsevier, but owned by a nonprofit foundation. Last year we get over 1,100 submissions, and we publish about 300 and something, so we have to reject over 70% of submissions. So even if our reviewers are fairly enthusiastic, on a scale of 0 to 10, they give a 5, we're not going to publish a 5. We need something that's in our top 70% and so on. We're looking, like all journals, for novel information for our readers. We also publish clinical reports and techniques to help our dentists improve their practice, to update their practice and change the way they practice dentistry. And those articles don't get cited. So we get data not only on citations and so on, but also on downloads, which is essentially readership. So often our most read articles are not our most cited articles. So we're kind of looking for a mix from our submissions.
Yeah, so Alex Sparreboom. I was previously affiliated with a journal called Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, which is a society journal from the American Society for Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. It's about a 100-year-old journal, which was published through Nature Publishing Group. So I stepped down in my role as associate editor last year after having done it for 10 years. And I'm still and have been associate editor of a journal called Clinical Cancer Research, which is one of the society journals for the American Association for Cancer Research. So I've been doing that for 12 years now. So this is a very high volume journal. We get about 4,000 submissions a year. The very broad readership, we have about 35,000 readers and people that subscribe through membership of the organization. And so, yeah, this is a lot of work. And so, people that are involved with this journal have to try to find ways to, to quickly see what's of interest to the readership. And so this takes a lot of time. So I get about on my plate 1 or 2 papers every day, for consideration. And so the mission of the editorial team is to weed out initially through triage about 50%, right? And so that leaves still a lot of things to consider, that needs to be sent out for peer review. But it's really fun doing it, though. I really enjoy it.
So maybe I'll just start by talking for a minute or so about how to get your work noticed. So as Alex said, his journal is high volume. So I get about 15 submissions a day, and I look at every one. And so the way I do it is I start at 4:30 in the morning. I'm an early bird. And so from 4:30 to 5:36 is when I do my journal stuff, because you're not supposed to do that at work. But anyway, so what I would say is, we publish about 18% of submissions, so we have about an 82% rejection rate. But I will tell you that half the ones that I get are just not within the scope. So submit to a journal that's within the scope of your work. And you know that by, of course, the homepage of the journal, but also by looking at what they're publishing. So, look at some of the recent articles in the recent editions and see what they're publishing. The other thing is use the cover letter, because that's the first thing I look at, is what is the author trying to tell me? There's a lot of new issues going on with publishing, and you have to say in your cover letter that the work is not under consideration at any other journal. I'll tell you, just this morning I had 2 papers that are duplicate submissions, and Elsevier has a database that they run through every submission now, and they pulled out 2 that were submitted to me this morning that said, oh, these are under consideration at other journals. Don't do that. So make sure that you use the cover letter wisely to not only say why you think this fits within the scope of the journal, but also prospective reviewers. Trust me, we're not experts in all of these papers as editors. We rely on the people that you're listing. And so don't list your friends, don't list your neighbors or your relatives. The other thing is, don't set up fake emails and list a fake person and review your own work. Trust me, this gets done all the time. We actually have a paper that'll be that we've submitted with the American Physiology Society editorial publications committee and myself talking about these issues in publication. People are setting up fake emails and fake profiles and reviewing their own work. Yeah. There's multiple other issues about purchasing of papers, and we just published a paper and had to retract it because it was already published under a different author set. So these are issues that are popping up all the time, and the game's always changing. So, but get your work noticed by, number 1, doing good work. Number 2, obviously doing the proper statistics and not over-interpreting your data. And number 3, sell yourself in the cover letter. So that's what I'll start with.
Yeah. Our first layer of review, an article received is going to go to the managing editor, and the managing editor is going to look and see, have you followed the instructions for authors? So that sounds so rudimentary, but there are so many papers, even from experienced authors, where table formatting, reference formatting, and simple things like that haven't been followed. The managing editor will also check and see, are these valid email addresses? Can they be verified? It will also go through a plagiarism check. Nobody in this room is going to do that, but rest assured that I think is the standard for where we're at. So scientific culture in your training in the United States is maybe at a little higher level. We tend to get a lot of submissions from abroad, and that scientific culture maybe isn't as far along, and so that's the reason that that layer has been put in place. Once it passes that and it gets to my hands, as Loren said, and has been emphasized several times, the main thing that I'm looking for is this an interesting article? Would I want to read this? And is it relevant to my topic area, or to the topic area of optometry and or ophthalmology? We get some surgical papers as well, and vision science. So I'm looking for something that I would want to read. Our rejection rate too, even though we're a small and niche journal, is about 70%. So your paper is competing for attention with a lot of noise out there. I mean, the publication space, the numbers I took away was the publication space is maybe 10 times the size that it really needs to be for stuff that people actually want to read. So you are competing with a lot of noise to get editors' attention. If it looks like solid science, it looks like something that's relevant, and it looks like something that I might be interested in, the next layer is to assign to a topical editor. I think a lot of journals use that format, so there's a lot of hands that are touching pieces as they go through review. The topical editor then is a topic expert. Like I say, we don't know everything, so there are topic experts that get it next, and they will assign the reviewers who will provide an arm's length peer review. Then that comes back after reviews are completed, hopefully in a timely manner. Time frame is really shortened up. I mean, you should expect an answer within a month to 6 weeks. We're shooting for that, but human beings take time to complete these steps. So I think you're within your rights, a month or 6 weeks or whatever the journal says is its target for you to ask what the heck's up with my paper, and stimulate people to submit that review. Reviews come back to a topical editor who will then screen the review for, is this constructive? Are there nasty elements in there? Is there conflicting advice? And try and give some sort of above the fray summary of what are the most important things that you should pay attention to as an author to try and fix and address. If there's conflicting advice, I always try and give the authors some help of, reviewer 1 makes a really good point. I'm not so sure about reviewer number 2, maybe off the mark. Perhaps you'd like to look at this paper to help you refute something that's a little bit off point. Then that goes back to the authors, and we go through the cycle again until we reach consensus that this paper is as good as it can be. Interestingly, that's not always the end of the story. As an editor, what I'm trying to do too is, if I'm not interested in a paper and I don't think it's going to progress and make the cut, is let somebody know early. Not work out all the kinks and work out all the details and then say, ultimately this paper is, now that I can see what's in there, I'm not really interested in it. Okay, this was 6 months ago. To me, it's more responsible and humane to let somebody know that your topic just isn't that interesting and this science isn't as impactful as I would want for my journal. But that doesn't always happen. So keep in mind that is always, going through peer review successfully is not then a guarantee of publication, which is sad but true.
Couple of pieces of advice. The first on the plagiarism issue, do not submit an article that you haven't personally put through software to see if there's similarities.
It's free at OSU. You can use it online.
So yeah, most journals use Authenticate, and you may have to purchase a use. I would say that's highly recommended. Extremely embarrassing. It's not a foreign problem. It's a Louisville, Kentucky problem. It's a Lincoln, especially Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's a huge problem. So my advice is you don't know if your colleague has cut and paste where they shouldn't. If you're submitting with one of many authors, do it and make sure that there's not an issue. It's not the percentage that I look at, it's blocks of text. So just make sure that someone hasn't cut and paste from previous articles and so on to do that. Second thing is language. Many of you are non-native speakers. Many of you are much better at science than at English. So it may be beneficial to work with an editor to try to improve the level of submission. What I call the editor's dilemma is when something comes in and the English isn't good at all. If I send it back to the author, eventually they get it in a reasonable shape, and then it goes out for peer review, and the reviewers aren't enthusiastic, and we're going to reject that article. Authors are upset with me because how come you told me to do this, and now you're rejecting it after all these changes. So I tend to send something that's not that well written, that's difficult to understand, but might be good science to reviewers. And most peer reviewers can't see past the poor English or the poor layout. And most of the review that I get back is based on English rather than, is it novel, is it exciting science? Because we can fix the English, but it's difficult to get past the peer review. So my advice, no cut and paste, and make sure that you've got the English as good as you can, and if necessary, work with a professional reviewer.
That's funny that you hand it to somebody that is not very good at English or science, for that matter. But so yeah, two things that I think are interesting, specifically for the journal that I'm working with, but maybe more broadly relevant as well. One is that, so we just got a new editor-in-chief, and so his vision for the journal was slightly different from what it had been in the past. So he almost radically changed the mission and the scope of the journal. And so I think many of our typical people that submitted for their articles for consideration were unaware of this. They hadn't been notified, hadn't been taken in that type of information. And so all of a sudden, a large chunk of our regular contributors were essentially confronted with the fact that this may not be any longer their home journal. And so this was something very important, and that's unfortunate for many authors. But I think this comes down to taking in specific guidelines that come with all journal sites. And I think as authors we all need to be very well aware of what it is that a journal actually is looking for in order to avoid getting your paper triaged before it's even considered. So this has been said many times, but I think this is really essential. The second thing, which is interesting, that's something that not all journals do, but we do at Clinical Cancer Research, which is that we have a very strict no appeal policy. So if your paper gets rejected, even if it's for the wrong reasons, then we will not consider any appeal. And so the reason for this is that we predicted that certain authors, particularly vocal individuals, may get their wish and have their thing reconsidered, when most others will not. And so we thought it was intrinsically unjustified and unfair, to consider appeals. So if this is relevant to the journal that you consider, then you need to know this, because you may want to consider differently how you address reviewer concerns to make sure that you actually pass to the next round.
So one thing that people often ask me is, especially for junior faculty or postdocs, I want to get on an editorial board. I know this is important for P&T. My boss is going to like this. This looks good, right? So what I would recommend is, and I get these often, is write an email to the editor-in-chief, and express your willingness to review, because you're not going to be put on an editorial board, or we call it an editorial advisory board, unless you're a good reviewer. So offer to review and list specifics of what your expertise is or what you're comfortable reviewing, that's within the scope of the journal. And I get this all the time. I get, dear editor of, and it'll be the wrong journal. So people will send it to 45 editors, right? I laugh and delete it. So, but if you make it personal and specialized and say, I'm really interested in reviewing for your journal, these are my areas, here's my CV, even, you can put, I saw a recent article in your journal and it was blah, blah, blah. Trust me, that's how you get on an editorial board. These things are what are used for, this is part of the whole P&T process. So make sure that, you personalize things. So are we gonna, do you want us to just open for questions, Stuart, or how do you want to do that? I
mean, what's helpful and been helpful in the past is, I imagine there are people out there who've submitted papers and had issues come up in review that you might want to get our perspective on. And so I welcome those.
Don't all come at once.
Another part of the process is, what is your attitude in responding to review? Okay, so you've done your work, submitted your paper, you got your reviews back. My advice is along the lines of responding to reviews in a paper is like responding to reviews to your grant submission, is grateful compliance. It's kind of my code word that, you must specifically address the issues that are being raised. Reviewers find it very annoying to have you blow past and or dismiss something that's been raised in review, whether it's a paper or your grant. So what are your options? What are your strategies? Yes, you're right. And this is something that I need to fix, and so you fix it, or you argue your way out of it. And what I mean argue is not shouting for the rooftops or, the reviewer clearly is confused here. Is a grateful compliance. So a respectful and well-sourced or data-driven response will get you farther than, no, the reviewer is an idiot. There's always, one reviewer loved me, one reviewer hated me. There's always it. Reviewer number two. How come reviewer number two is always on the review? How come I couldn't have two reviewer number ones? Happens all the time. So, what's a constructive, what's a productive, let's put it that way, what's a productive response to review? Is, I say, your attitude is grateful compliance, not anger. Get your anger out of the way, and then, speak to the reviewer as you would like to be spoken to. That is, with data or with specifics, with citations, with a well-reasoned argument that addresses what the reviewer was concerned about.
I always say you always want to say thank you, even though they are idiots, the ones that don't like it. You always say thank you so much for the time, your points are well taken. However, you're clearly wrong, right? So how do you say that? And I would say don't respond the first couple days, or don't start writing that, because you're going to just be in the anger mode. But what I always do too, along the lines with what Don said, is when I get a paper rejected, I always use the comments, revise it, and I send it to a better journal. I don't go actually lower. I try to go to a better journal to prove them wrong. But that's just my Norwegian background. So,
just to say, it's very different between a grant and a paper. So your paper will come back either reject, and then if there's no appeal, another journal, or revise. And essentially, revise, it's going to get accepted, at least with our journal, providing you address the points in a reasonable way. It's very, very rare for someone to be asked to revise an article and then for that not to be rejected. And usually it's just because the authors fail to comply or they abandon it or something. So it's not like a grant. You don't have to go from 30 to 15, with that resubmission. With your paper, you just read the comments carefully, address them in a thorough manner. They're trying to make your article better. They're trying to, improve it for the readers, make it more concise and so on. But it's time to open the champagne when you get that revised. That's going to be an accepted article for you.
Can you give a little more specifics about the kinds of what makes it an interesting article or an innovative article, the kind of significant article that you would like to publish? What are the kind of things you're looking for?
We've started to include in the abstract a significance statement, and it's remarkable how difficult that statement is to write. A 1 or 2 sentence statement about why anybody should care. I mean, and this is grant advice too. I mean, there's a significance section to the review. Why do you think people should be reading this? How do you think you're moving your field forward? If you can't come up with that significance statement, then there's a problem. So yeah, as I start to look through the paper and say, am I going to care about this? And starting in the abstract, looking at that first significance statement, this is going to be an eye catcher or not. Your specific aims page, you've got 1 page to make the reviewer care about whether these specific aims are important in your field or not. So, what am I looking for about what's is going to have an impact, or what am I interested in? Kind of starts with your ability to conceptualize and express briefly, why should I care?
So I think my journal is a little different because we're so broad. We have a lot of specialty journals here, but our tagline for the journal is implications for health and disease. Very broad. So define why what you're doing is important, how it has implications and relates to the scope of the journal, but don't oversell it. You didn't cure cancer in this paper, probably. It would be great, but so just be specific and, make sure you're submitting. All the time we get these natural products about a mushroom that's found on the left side of a mountain in Brazil. That's great, but I don't care. We have in there that it has to have, the clinic or the component, the active component needs to be isolated and characterized. Make sure that you're following the instructions.
I just want to make sure if you cure cancer, send it to my journal.
I suppose this question overlaps a little bit with what we were just talking about, but sometimes I have the feeling that it fits the scope of a journal, but then I get the dreaded desk reject. And so I was wondering how to best utilize both, I suppose, the abstract and the cover letter to really drive home why, I think. I mean, what kind of information are you looking for?
So with the desk reject, it's okay to email the editor directly and say, can you give me a little more guidance on why this was desk rejected? Because a lot of times those are form letters and they're just in the submission form that we click, it's not within the top 50% basically. But if your work is within the scope of the journal and you felt that you sold it, it should at least pass that initial screening. So I would reach out. But like I said, just make sure you're within the scope of the journal.
Say, if you all are in training, I would imagine you work out with your advisor. I'm thinking about, in my world, it's specific enough that what are like the 5 journals in my head for, top to bottom, where I'm shooting for? And I don't know, yeah, if you get that automatic rejection, it's like, so what's next? What's your tier of journals in your discipline, in your department, that you and your advisor can agree to, or sort of what are my layers of where's plan B, plan C, and so forth? And if, okay, you took your best shot, and that was rejected, where else in your discipline would you go to next? And yeah, if you don't get anywhere with reaching out, you move on. I say the publication space is big enough. There should be plenty of options.
I've had an editor kind of intervene when a reviewer was being really enthusiastic, and basically say, reviewer 2 is done now. But it was never clear to me whether it was okay for me to contact the editor directly in a similar case and have like a sidebar if a reviewer is kind of trying to take over your paper, asking you to do work that's outside the scope, or continually asking for new stuff every time you do revisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why we do what we do. A lot of times, some journals blind to the associate editor, but now he's fine the editor-in-chief. Others, the associate editor is the one who sends the decision, so it's really journal dependent. But absolutely reach out to the editor with any issues. Don't use it to just complain if you have a reviewer that's negative, but if they're just never happy, you can definitely email them.
Yeah, I mean, every editor has been an author, so we've been through that sort of experience as well, and am trying to watch out for, when as a reviewer asking an author to chase his or her tail, being overly negative, being off point. And if I'm interested in your paper, I will try and head that off at the pass so that your paper can make progress. So, right, either give you permission to unweight the comments of a reviewer who's not being constructive, or some sort of advice along those lines, or stop inviting reviewer number 2. You've had your shot. We heard you, and now we're done with you. But yeah, keep that perspective that every author has been or every editor has been in your shoes and should understand the problems that you're facing.
And probably is still in your shoes, because I still get people reviewing my stuff that are idiots.
I have a question off statistics. So I submit to a lot of really clinically oriented journals, and sometimes I have some pretty advanced statistics that I haven't seen in the journal before, or it's something that me and my biostats person came up with. Would it be beneficial to include in the cover letter that this may be an innovative way to analyze the data and recommend it goes to whoever the statistics editor might be? Or is that kind of telling the editorial board what to do, and that would be bad?
So in our journal, every database article gets statistical review that the reviewers are enthusiastic about. And we do have problems with the stats in many of the submissions that they need fixing for sure. So we pay our stats reviewers. We have about 12 of them, and they help us a lot. But it's a big problem to make sure the stats are rigorous on a lot of these articles.
And I think absolutely it's okay to propose anything in the cover letter other than that they'll pay you. I had an author offer me a sizable check to get their paper accepted. It would have been great. Could have gone on a trip.
That's not happened to me.
I know. I just got back from, no, I'm kidding. Obviously, I sent it to the legal department at Elsevier, but it happens. So, but it's okay to propose anything you like, and to help the editor along the way, and describe how that new statistical analyses could benefit other disciplines, etc.
Yeah, I would add the citation for whatever, if the procedure that you're using, provide the citations so that reviewers maybe can have a little easier access to it and check out. But I think your idea of describing why this is the right approach in a cover letter is great.
I've always just been kind of curious, do editors really consider if you say don't send to someone as a reviewer? So you just take that seriously, or are you more like send it and then kind of take
I'd say it's a little easier in my field again because it's sort of a small world that I know who the players are and I can guess why somebody's asking for an exclusion. But I do look at that and generally try and respect it because there are plenty of other people who can give an arm's length opinion while avoiding that professional conflict or personal conflict that spills over into their professional relationship.
One of the interesting things, and this is partially anecdotal, but I think it's true though, which is that I think a lot of ideas about who are your competitors and who do you not want to have as reviewers are actually really not well founded. So my own personal experience has been that people that are identified as competitors are actually usually really the best reviewers, to judge the value of the work. And I've actually very rarely experienced people to be biased, towards being really negative and making people's lives miserable.
I'm really good friends with our managing editor who knows who all the reviewers are. And have you ever gone through the review experience of trying to put a name to reviewer number 2? And that might set up what you perceive to be professional conflicts. And what the managing editor tells me, he says, I hear those conversations, they're always wrong. Okay, so it might be fun to put a face to a name, but you're probably wrong.
I will say, though, I've never invited someone that someone has excluded. It's journal specific, of course, and I now am not actually inviting. That's the associate editors are doing that, but I tell them, please just don't go there. Just exclude them. Other questions? You're the brave one.
I try. I'm wondering if you could provide some comments, maybe from the editorial side of things, of what makes a good peer reviewer. What kinds of comments you really like to see, especially for junior faculty members that might be interested in volunteering their time for peer editing, or those that may not have even reached their terminal degrees yet, and if that might be an option for them, if they had some good advice on what you guys are looking for.
Awesome question. I would say be specific, comment on each aspect. Each journal is different, so they may have a form you have to fill out versus just sort of free flow. Major criticisms, minor criticisms, but be specific. And it's okay to cite literature showing opposite effects, et cetera, and what's your interpretation of it. And also, it's important, and I can't restate this enough, to put comments to the editor about what's your gut about this. Do you think even with revision, it's not going to rise to the level of a publishable paper? So be specific and be on time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to follow your impulse to want to be a reviewer, because being a reviewer is going to make you a better author. You get a chance to see what other people are doing. You get a chance to compare yourself to what else is, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought. Look at the things that I would have changed that I noticed in this paper. I agree with Loren. Be specific, be constructive, and say speak as you would want to be spoken to, that you give a criticism that's actionable. Say the problem with a vague criticism is, okay, what am I meant to do with this? So I always try and give as specific advice as to what I think the fix is. You need more data. There's another experiment that needs to be done here. This is just incomplete. Giant hole in the middle of this. Or, your statistical analysis is incorrect. Okay, well, can you maybe throw me how do you see it, and what do you think the right approach would be here? So, yeah, I think, specific, constructive, actionable, timely. We're developing a good list of words here.
So I ask our reviewers, first of all, to decide how enthusiastic they are about the paper. So we got to reject 70%. So is this one that if you're enthusiastic about it, or if less enthusiastic? If you don't think it's going to be a good fit with our journal, just explain why, and don't, that cuts short your review at that point. If you are enthusiastic, why, and then how can you make it better? How can this article be improved? Be specific. I ask our reviewers not to rewrite articles. It's a lot of work to rewrite. Usually they tell the authors to do things that are not in the journal style. So, then one person tells them to add a space before the degree sign, and then we take out the space, or vice versa, and so on. So, that stuff is, it's not helpful really and then two reviewers tell them to do different things in that regard. So as a reviewer, how can we make this better? How can we improve the article, and why is it something you're enthusiastic about?
or why not, right? So I think capturing the fatal flaws and the logical fallacies, that's really critical. And the other thing is, this sounds very negative, but try to apply that to your own work as well. Because I've seen many reviewers becoming hypercritical on somebody else's work, but not on their own.
So I know we're almost out of time here, but what I will say is if anyone's interested in reviewing, email me. No, I'm serious, because we actually have an early reviewer program as well at Elsevier, which I'm happy to put you in touch with. But also, if you're interested, I'm right across the street, and I'm happy to help you start reviewing and get on the trajectory to get on editorial boards, etc.
And if you want your article put through or your manuscript put through Authenticate, if you email it to me, I'll do it for you. So.
Thanks so much. Yeah.